Our keynote today is going to be a forward-looking conversation in two parts. Now, the orthopedic industry is growing, as we all know, but it's also undergoing significant change. And in the first part of our talk, we'll talk about how some of that change is creating gaps and opportunities in how we deliver care. And then in the second part, we'll talk specifically about some of the technologies and the product categories that are setting up to really drive future growth. And then at the end, we'll close it with some lessons learned in leadership and communication before we get you back out onto the floor at 9 sharp. Okay, so let's jump right in. Ira, if it's okay, I'll start with you. We'll jump right into the deep end. In our preparatory call, a question came up that I really wanted to bring forward to our audience, and that was, will the classic value equation still work for orthopedics in the future? Why or why not?
Well, it's a trick question. It's a trick question. I always love that. It's like Calvin and Hobbes. Is that a trick question or something? And it's a trick question because I don't think the value equation ever worked in orthopedics. Okay, and I learned value equation from Michael Porter and from Robert Kaplan in executive education at Harvard Business School. And that is outcomes, value equal outcomes divided by cost. The big failure in the value equation is there's no revenue in that equation. There's no revenue talked about. And so what I talk about in the development of our health system, which services 1.15 million people, is that we have cost, we have outcomes, and we have revenue. And you need to come up with an equation and with a balanced model that takes into account all those three factors, including creative compensation packages for the surgeons. Because the surgeons are the only revenue generators in this play. So when you talk about outcomes, the surgeons determine the outcomes. You talk about cost, surgeon behavior. I know there are value analysis committees, and we actually did away with our product committee at our hospital and left it up to the chairman to decide on implants. That's another story itself. But, I just think without understanding, we have a revenue crisis from our point of view in the healthcare industry. We don't have a cost crisis. You cannot cost cut yourself to prosperity in health systems or in the companies that are represented on the floor here.
Yeah, I guess I'm a living example of how broken the value equation is because I left a clinical practice to join industry, right? So I guess I'm a living example of how it's broken. And I would tend to echo everything that Ira said. I have a lot of friends so I trained at Rush here just down the street, and a lot of prolific hip and knee surgeons that are my colleagues and my contemporaries. And a lot of them have, at least the more entrepreneurial ones, right? Because the value equation is completely broken and there's no revenue piece, they've gone into kind of and these are folks that work at, prestigious academic medical centers. They've sort of left those posts and they've set up their own kind of private practice, ambulatory surgery center model, and life is pretty good, right? Because they have and so what you're seeing is, remember when the BPCI model came out, what was it now, Ira, was that 10, whatever, 15 years, it's hard to believe. That was really sort of the ultimate trick by CMS to take surgeons, we're the kind of people that put our heads down and just work, right, like hamsters. And they said, aha, joke's on you, I'll get you to lower your costs, and then I'll lower, right, it was the ultimate joke. And so I think, anyway, a long-winded way of saying what I think the market is showing is the equation is broken. And at least when it comes to sort of the idea of aligning the incentives, what I visualize from my friends and colleagues who have stayed in practice is they're all migrating to an environment, call it an ASC as a catch-all term, that allows them to have that revenue piece. And of course, you work in, doing God's work in an academic medical center in an underserved area. But anyway, so that's what I see, and we can talk more about it. But those are my initial thoughts on that.
And then beyond that, as we look at consolidation happening amongst device companies, that's not only the place it's happening, Sharat, right? What are some of the trends between payers and hospital systems that the people in this room need to be aware of and prepared for?
Yeah, you brought up the point. I mean, consolidate in every industry, right? In pharma, in med tech, and even outside of orthopedics, right? In cardiovascular. I mean, and then of course on the payer side, we basically have five big, an oligopoly, behemoth of payers and health systems, right? If you look at the data, the number of mergers and back 25 years ago, we had hundreds of health. My father practiced at an independent hospital, which is now for the most part, a dying breed, right? So anyway, you bring up the point on consolidation. So, what I visualize on the I guess if you're asking just a general question on the payer divide, that stack up, you're having more powerful players in each vertical. In medtech, you've got the big companies. In the health system, you've got the big companies, and in the payers, you've got the big companies, and they're all sort of using their size to fight for selling power, so to speak. So I think what that's doing, it's probably stifling innovation a little bit, because that sort of becomes unfortunately, right? It becomes a secondary goal, and they're really trying to just bid a higher price for the service they're providing. So that's what I see. I think Ira has some thoughts around some of the other innovations that are happening on the health system side that are interesting.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I think we have an identity crisis when it comes to health systems and payers. No one knows who's who, okay? Health systems are becoming payers. Payers are becoming health systems. Doctors don't know who's more important, the primary care doctor or the surgeon, and we all know it's the surgeon, so that's a separate issue, okay? And that identity crisis is problematic because healthcare is an episodic business that starts with, hello, I'm the patient, and you're the doctor. And then it gets translated further and further up. I'd be very interested to see whether Amazon's purchase of, I think, Medical One, or I wouldn't be surprised if Northwell in New York, which is a very big payer, buys a health insurer and becomes sort of a for-profit Kaiser Permanente. I mean, look at Kaiser involving with Geisinger right now. Okay, I know Mike Suck very well, and he just was doing quite well at Geisinger, and all of a sudden Kaiser comes in. Now this is a whole different cultural change. So we have an identity crisis, because in the end, healthcare is about treating individuals, communities, and regions, and delivering care through and getting outcomes through defined measures, and the ability to deliver care in a standardized way. I wonder whether many of these big mergers will, as was said, would be stifling innovation, because they're sort of in Clay Christensen's innovation dilemma. They have to make money on their purchase and for their shareholders, and they can't split away innovation and focus on that and risk their base product, which is selling insurance and taking risk. And if your life is selling insurance and taking risk, you're missing the idea that really it's medicine, especially orthopedics, and is quite transactional. I go out, we do quite a lot of business. We have over 1 million clinic visits in our system, and we buy a lot of product. And that's a transactional business for us still. Neither the companies that sell to us or the companies that innovate with us are taking risk. And that is going to come to a loggerhead jam when the people who take risk and want to pull money out of the system. I mean, insurers take about, they will tell you they take less, but they take close to 20% of the money out of the system. And that's why we're having a revenue crisis.
But Ira, part of the if you look at if you're a sort of a investor nerd, right, and you follow the different sectors, the health insurers, in the last 20 years, if you'd have put $1 of in United Health Group in 2020, that I think it would be $1,000. So the health insurers are making.
They're doing great.
So, I think part of the reason why health systems are getting into the insurance business is because they see how profitable it is, right? And there's obviously some of the accounting shenanigans that, and again, I apologize for any health insurers in the building, but there's obviously.
I have no apologies.
But so anyway, when you're asking the question just in general, we see health systems like Intermountain Health started their own insurance product. Like UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, now has a big insurance product.
Yep.
You see that happening, and you ask, well, why is that happening? Well, I think it's happening because health systems want a piece of that pie where they can sort of regulate how much is spent in the population they cover. But anyway, I think coming back to your question of sort of how does that apply to the people in this room? I mean, I always think there's interesting opportunity when there are when there's consolidation like this going on, right? I think there would be an opportunity for device companies device manufacturers maybe to partner with a health system directly, right? And this was tried. You remember at Geisinger, was it maybe 10
Yes.
years ago? They had, I don't know if you guys remember, there was a partnership where Geisinger and Medacta, which is, you guys know Medacta very well, of course, they had a partnership where they were sort of guaranteeing the outcomes of 2 operations. It was
Right.
a knee replacement and maybe a hip replacement and a lumbar fusion. That's an interesting model, right? Where if you're a patient in that, what ends up happening, you come in the door, you have a Medacta, knee replacement done, and you have a guarantee that if there are any problems, I mean, I think some of those things are pretty interesting, interesting models, and whether any of this consolidation allows some of that is sort of, what I would think about, and so that would be interesting to,
Sure.
to consider. The other thing I would say is, with this consolidation, and we could sort of talk about this. You work obviously at sort of a hospital where you're employed, right?
Right.
If you come back to sort of some, what I've observed in my colleagues, who a lot of them are now in private practice, in ASC, model. What they've done, right? They've with their hand, they've raised their hand and said, you know what? I'm going to remove myself from this massive consolidation. I'm not going to work at Rush anymore. I'm not going to work at Northwestern. I'm going to go do my own private practice thing. Well, of course, those are sort of small business, right? I mean, they're small ASCs that are hyper efficient, and they're quite profitable in general. That trend of what's happening with the giant mergers is, again, what I see is people moving out of the larger systems, surgeons moving out. Is there an opportunity for folks in this room to partner directly with some of those colleagues, and because again, they're cost conscious in terms of their implant costs and things like that. So, I mean, that could be, but I'd be curious in your world,
it's very interesting. It's the ASCs, and it's probably your next question.
Go ahead.
The ASCs are profitable today, and they're not profitable for everyone. Okay, and I liken the ASC model now, and everyone's hospitals are all worried about ASCs. They're worried about ASCs. Well, primary care doctors were worried about hospitalists about 15 years ago, before the hospitalist program. Oh, they're going to take away money from us. They're going to do this. Hospitals will adapt. There'll be places of sicker people. It's really not that profitable for a hospital to do an arthroscopy. It just isn't. Joint replacements are very profitable for the hospitals. There is no question about that. And they will lose to ASCs, and they will adapt and figure it out, and some hospitals will close, and the market forces will define that. The ASC model ranges in passive income from tens of thousands to some hundreds of thousands of dollars for the orthopedic surgeons. And if anyone tells me that's not the driver that's driving ASC care, I think you're crazy. I think, there is no way anyone's really doing it for quality, outcomes, and efficiency.
Well, it might be a combination, though, right?
No, you get
It's
that
a combination
byproduct.
of the control of the lifestyle. I don't know how many folks in the audience, again, sort of, you get a chance to get in the OR and sort of see what it's like. But, as
Quality
right,
lifestyle.
I'm sure when you came to Montefiore early in your career, I bet your turnover times were miserable. It probably took
They're
an
still
hour.
turning over the room.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, my point is a lot of the reason people go to the ASC, and we're sort of digressing from your question a bit, but it's also a lifestyle play, right?
Correct.
If you've got control over the staff, you've got control over the implant system, right? You can do 8 procedures by 2 o'clock in the afternoon,
And not get stressed
and have
out
time in the
and
afternoon.
get bumped by the vascular surgeon for.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there are multiple drives. It's not purely just economics, is all.
No, but the economics.
No, they're a big driver.
drives
for sure.
underneath, which is good. I think it's good because they are in a free market that has to be a good ASC, that has to deliver good outcomes, and they won't be popular because one day we're going to have so many ASCs It's like I mean, when I was first starting in orthopedics, and this was in the 1990s, despite looking like I started in the 2000s, in the 1990s, I can't tell you how many joint replacement companies there were and how many manufacturers there were. And now there's just so much fewer. And the reality is we're still seeing innovation, and we're still seeing innovation. So, but I worry when there's an ASC on every block, what's going to happen with the flood of ASCs and then the compensation models and the groups get larger and then the individual surgeon gets a little bit less in passive income. But I think since the reimbursement to ASCs is lower, it really affects people in this audience because the reality is there's going to be much more aggressive negotiation of your products in the ASC because hospitals have, ASCs have thrown out Exparel, for example, because it's $300. $300. They're getting $12,000 for a joint replacement, or $9,000, or whatever the number is. $300. They're negotiating on $300. In a hospital, they would have just said.
But see, that's what happens when you've got sort of the surgeon, the entrepreneurials sort of running the system. I mean, they're looking at every line item on their P&L and trying to obviously optimize the profit of their. But I guess coming back to your major question, you asked the question sort of what do you think about payers and health systems, the consolidation. The market's an amazing thing, right? I mean, what I am seeing is a migration. And, if you go to Rush this morning, right? I did my fellowship. They don't do many joint replacements at the main hospital anymore, right? Rush used to be like a bastion of joint replacements. Now they're all done at ASCs in the surrounding community. I mean that is what we're seeing, in some regard. And of course, so. And I think that that creates opportunity, right? In cardiology, you came from the cardiac rhythm management world, right? I mean, remember in the 1980s, when my dad was early in his career as a gastroenterologist, most cardiologists were in private practice, right? Of course, that shifted in the 2000s. All cardiologists now are. I mean, can you even name a private practice? I mean, every cardiologist is now employed by the health system because the market. I mean, the incentives made sense, right? And you saw that transition. So I think what's interesting when you ask this question about payers and systems. Every specialty in medicine is you talk about primary care, right? Every specialty is so different, and doctors are, generally pretty smart people, except that, they don't know how to negotiate for reimbursement very well, but they're good at biochemistry and good at, they tend to figure out how to optimize their incentives in whatever model they are. So, in every specialty, in plastic surgery, right? How many plastic surgeons are on staff at a hospital? I mean, none, right? They're all in private practice. So, I guess I'm answering your question at a little bit of a macro level that the market sort of determines where the people doing the real work, the surgeons and the patients go. And I think that's where the opportunity is for the people in this room as sort of the guts of the lifeblood of orthopedics who actually make the stuff. There's probably some disruptive innovation to be had by people in this room partnering directly with the folks doing the work in these disparate ASC, so to speak.
So Ira, let's play it out. You said, if there's an ASC on every block, so to speak. So let's just imagine a couple of years from now, let's say 50% of joints are done in the ASC.
Sure.
What are some of the impacts? What are some of the things that you foresee being obstacles when we get to that level of adoption?
Well, I think the first obstacle always, again, I'm going to go back to the revenue, is the insurance companies. This is an interesting scam of the insurance companies.
We're bashing insurance companies.
No, I'm not.
I'm
just telling the truth.
Audience today.
Subtle
bash there yet again. Don't miss that.
A subtle New Yorker. That's an amazing concept.
Exactly.
What ends up happening is, as everyone knows, there's Part A collection and Part B collection. Part A goes to the facility. Part B goes to the physician. Okay? So I, as a physician, build an ASC, and I bring down the cost of care. Amazing concept. I really bring down the cost. It's cheaper to do a joint replacement in an ASC. Those studies have been done. They continue to be done. We don't even, in our journal, we don't even take a paper on it because it's been done so many times, And what's fascinating is the surgeon who has chosen to put more work on their practice. So when you bring a patient to the ASC, It's more work on the surgeon, on the practice, because you have to prepare all the pre-op, you have to prepare all the episode of care.
Previously, the hospital did all that work, right?
And previously, the hospital did all that work.
Right.
Post-op care, post-op setup. What if they get readmitted? What if 3 days later they have to go to an ASC because they have uncontrollable pain? All that, you have to hire a nurse navigator. A tremendous amount of cost in the episode of care are happening. The insurance companies has made us think everything is happening in the first 2 days or the first day. But in reality, the cost. So why haven't the physicians gotten higher Part B revenues for bringing patients to the ASC? They're getting the same Part B, which makes no sense to me. You know,
but Ira, what they've done, right? What they've done is you broke it down perfectly. They're making the revenue on the Part A because they have ownership in the facility, which they could never have in the hospital.
No, I know why they're doing it, but not everyone has ownership, and some people just operate there. But just the move, they should double down. They should not only make money on the fact that the insurance company should pay higher, but they don't. And that's what the broken system is. We need, there's a professor at Harvard Business School, Susan Galani, who works on compensation models for physicians. And in the compensation model related to the ASC, there should be either a global package that pays the Part B as well, so the surgeon can double down on it, because they are definitely spending a lot more money. And there's a lot of, I mean, we have seen episodic care companies. I mean, there may be some out there right now that work on helping people, force therapeutics and groups like that are trying to help the physicians run that expensive process. But these companies are not cheap, and you're not getting more Part B revenue for that. So you're going to have to take some of your revenue from the Part A, from the passive revenue, and put it into episodic care management. And there's a lot of innovation still out there in episodic care management, whether you're a home exercise physical therapy company, whether you're a readmission company, a nurse navigation company. These are huge drivers right now, you know, in the 90-day episodic care. And now that Medicare has required outcomes. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but there's, starting June 1st, just this June 1st, you have to do preoperative and postoperative outcomes for up to a year after.
PROMs.
Yeah. Patient reported outcome measures. And that is another cost onto the office, and Medicare's decreased the Part B rate for the office. So it's not the hospital has to do it. So I was for 17 years in private practice before I became the chairman. So I've lived, and I also worked for Kaiser for 5 years. So I've kind of had an odd, eclectic career.
So are you saying that given, I mean, let me try to, I'm the chronic summarizer. Are you trying to say that it's a strange dynamic, or maybe you're saying, if you're predicting the future to Mike's question, are you trying to say that invariably, given how labor intensive it is, right, to oversee the entire episode of care? If you take a patient, used to do their knee replacement in a hospital, now you're going to do it in, Dr. Kirschenbaum ASC on the corner over there. If you're taking over that, eventually that's going to become, how do I say, not profitable because it's so labor intensive. Is that where you see things going?
I see a cost of goods sold to be.
And you're not speaking of implant cost of goods sold.
No,
you're saying just
human
the
effort.
Patient cost of goods.
biggest cost in a hospital, personnel effort. When I want to buy a new piece of metal, okay, I kind of smile when my surgeons say, "Is it okay if we buy this new operating room table?" But I said, that's such an easy decision to say yes on. But when you say you want 2 nurse practitioners and a physician's assistant because you're going crazy seeing 45 people a day and the outpatient and the calls, that increases my cost. I buy that table's 10, 20 year lifespan. So I find it easy to negotiate metal, hard to negotiate personnel.
Yeah, fair enough.
So as
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah, sure. And it gives me kind of a bridge to my next one as we switch from more of the macro factors and focus the lens down on to some of the technologies and products that we're seeing emerge today. Sharat, do you think the emergence of some of these digital technologies, whether it's robotics or whether it's apps or navigation, could that help the burden that Ira was talking about? So what of these technologies do you think are truly valuable and truly worth it?
Just to give you a little background, you guys know the Zimmer My Mobility product. When I left practice, I got hired by Apple. This was back in 2017, that was literally an idea on a napkin, and we built it into this sort of episode of care thing that now I don't work for Zimmer or Apple anymore. But that was like a fundamental experience to be inside the guts of arguably the leading user experience. Apple is like the leading user interface, right? User experience company. Everything they touch is, you open the box, it's magic. So the answer to the question is, I absolutely have always believed that it's pretty archaic, Ira, to me, that in 2024, I do a knee replacement on somebody, yesterday, and they go home, yesterday from the ASC, and I actually physically have to bring them back in the office in 6 weeks to check. To me, that is the most caveman. We make fun of ourselves as barbarian, caveman orthopedic. That to me, and the reason we do it, right? Here's why we do it. We do it, Mike, because it's most efficient for me to have my waiting room full of 50 people that I can shuttle through. Yeah. But really, it's not the best thing. So I have always believed that, I could envision, and I've got slides on it. I've given talks on this. You can tell I'm very passionate about it. We could do so much better in reducing that burden of management and even the PROM thing, right? Imagine a world where you've got a patient, wearing an Apple Watch and they have it before their surgery, and they get their surgery, and then I use that watch as sort of the tool that tells me how they're doing, right? They're sitting on the couch and I can monitor that, right? Then something must be wrong. But if they're taking 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 steps a day and they're getting around pretty well, I don't need them to come. I don't even need an X-ray, because I know by the fact that they're doing well physically, so I can do a quick phone call. So my point is, I absolutely believe that, and I haven't talked about the operating suite yet, that's purely in the outpatient, but I fundamentally believe it is crazy to me that you came from the CRM world, right? Defibrillators are amazing machines now. They take people, they shock them, they don't even know they're getting, it's amazing what it's done. I do see a world in the future where, some type of wearable device that, that's easy to use, that could really make it better for both the surgeon and the patient. Now back to the whole operating suite thing, and Ira's going to have a lot of opinions on this, but I'll be brief on this. Why do we have these conferences that, I don't know if you guys have ever been to like CCJR, some of these big orthopedic meetings where there are a bunch of, my nerdy colleagues on the stage. We have these funny sessions we call the disasterplasty, where everyone tries to put up the worst case they can put up, like what is, the acetabular cup is in the pelvis. Well, why do those things happen in general, Ira? They happen because the primary, right, if you go all the way back when the patient had no surgeries done, right, when they had just an arthritic joint, the primary surgery that's generally, if you do it right the first time, it tends to last. So I still believe, given the fact that we're going to call it 2 million joint replacements in America next year, and given the number of surgeons out there who are doing joint replacements, and given the invasiveness of the procedure and the definitive nature, you can't turn back, there is still a massive opportunity to have the average surgeon who does 20, 30, 40 joints a year improve their I believe there's a massive opportunity, and I sort of analogize it to like, everybody drives with a you'd be crazy not to put a Waze app on your phone now if you want to get somewhere and let it tell you with the traffic. So I think there's still a huge opportunity. We're undersaturated in sort of having accessible technology for every surgeon to make the procedure just completely reliable, reproducible. Yeah. But we don't need disasterplasty conferences anymore, because I don't think those are funny. I think it's, so anyway, that's my soapbox. I'll shut up now.
No. It's so fascinating because, I give a lecture called Healthcare in My America, okay? Because 10 to 20% of patients don't have health insurance. Another 20-30% have Medicaid, crummy insurance. And the next 20-30% are not living large. Okay, 6% of my patients in the South Bronx have access to the internet. Okay, so we're talking about, you guys wanted to. I had a discussion with Kevin Logo about three or 4 years ago. I mentioned it to you earlier. I said, what do you think of the highest growing potential markets for joint replacement worldwide? And He didn't hesitate what the answer was because everyone knows the answer is India. I said, absolutely wrong. Safety net hospitals in the United States that are underserved and pay American dollars. Let me give you a story. When I came to Bronx Care, they did 25 joint replacements. We now do 1,200, and we pay with American dollars. Okay? That is real money and a real change. So we have to be careful that the digital episode of care is not only helping a certain number of people. That's a caution, just a slight caution, because there's a whole world out there.
But don't a lot of those patients have cell phone access of some kind?
They have Obama phones, which have limited data.
Sure. Fair enough.
You know, it's complex for us.
No, understood.
We use texting a lot to them, and that makes a big difference. But you know, the digital technology in the operating room, the robotics. People, I always love going to these meetings, whether it's Orthopedic Summit or CCJR, and they say, let's have a discussion on whether we should have robots or not. They're here. They're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. If you read the news, Zimmer just made a deal with Think Surgical, so they doubled down on robots. Now not only do they have their own robot, but they're giving you access to an open access robot. Okay, so what's happening is robots are here. They're going to make a lot of these B surgeons, B plus and A minus surgeons, to prevent disasteroplasties. I believe the robotics is here to stay because it's better surgery. You don't need to show me outcomes in 20 years. It's sort of like when Hal Medica in 1980s came up with the first jigs that were aligning. It used to be freehand knee replacements,
jigs, right?
Cutting jigs. They used to be, so when they come with new cutting jigs, people said, you don't need those. And it was like, yeah, and then it became just the standard for 30 years, 40 years, you know? So the
cutting slot, right?
Cutting slot, and we used to do it all freehand. So the reality is that these digital technologies are also connected to data. And I think the key feature of any of this, whether it's a startup I'm involved with at Gate Science, which is collecting data on pain, or whether you are involved with My Mobility collecting data, or Force Therapeutics collecting data, or of course the Canary from Zimmer, which there's patient-reported outcomes. I actually trademarked the term called patient-sourced outcomes.
Sure.
This is information from the patient that is being given somewhere, and the patient doesn't even know the information. So for those of you who may not know, the Canary is a Bluetooth device that is embedded in the stem of the knee replacement and gives information about gait, and gives information about stability, and gives information about walking, and may give information about implant loosening without the patient having to report anything. Sure. And I think those patient-sourced outcomes is going to explode in the next 5 to 10 years.
Can I ask you a question on that, though? Yeah. And again, we have a lot of manufacturers in the room who are always thinking about, how to optimize their manufacturing. I mean, those you talk about, those technologies are pretty expensive. I mean, what does a cardiac an ICD go for? $25,000, right? I mean,
back when I was in, it was 20.
Yeah, I mean, they're expensive, right? The defibrillator. I mean, who's going to pay the extra cost? Are you assuming that the cost will go down?
Yeah, it's the VCR model.
Implant?
It's a VCR model. The first VCR cost $700, and now you can get one for $50. I mean, certainly Canary's the first.
So you think the future is it'll have an embedded wearable, we call it an embedded wear inside the implant that's just transmitting information?
And that will be the standard. It will be that will be a standard.
And you think it'll get, now if you sort of overlay that with the ASC trend, where there's a lot of downward price pressure, I mean, how do you see that working?
I think that data goes back. Now you get real data coming back to the nurse navigator that can be used. You also get data to tell you about implant and implant design much more rapidly. So for people in this audience who are working with designer surgeons and doing an implant, imagine getting your information, and it's not only the wearables, but it's also just data from the My Mobility type apps and things like that give you information about the quality of your design. It's so important. And I think some of these companies are certainly realizing that the big money is going to be in big data.
Yeah.
Can I just say one more thing? Again, and I don't mean, one thing that I learned, that was amazing about working at Apple is they are so maniacally focused on the user experience. Right? I mean, everybody has an iPhone. You remember when you open the box and like, when you open a Mac box, it's perfect, right? You open it and the tension between the box, you don't have to tear any, when you rip the plastic off, right? That's all by design. One thing I do think there's a huge opportunity in our world, in our sort of smaller world of orthopedics outside the mega world of cell phones. And I say this, not being disparaging or the user experience for most of our orthopedic, whether it's navigation, I put robotics and navigation in the same big bucket. The user experience it doesn't feel like using an iPhone. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of opportunity, I think, and I think the reason for that is because we probably don't have UI, UX people who are embedded in the companies that are designing these systems, right? And so I think, just maybe digressing a bit, but what will drive further adoption, as you say,
is user experience.
Is if the user experience it's easy to use, then more doctors will use it. But even today, and I've used Mako, and all different robotics many times. It's not that user-friendly yet, right? And if we could get to where it feels like using an iPhone or an Apple Watch, that I think will drive more people to adopt. And there's a huge, huge opportunity.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. I mean, Apple hired IDEO to develop it. Maybe,
we need an IDEO.
Zimmer needs to hire IDEO, or Stryker needs to hire IDEO to say, you built what? It looks like this. You roll it in with 5 people into the operating room. It's like It's like a Frankenstein lab, or from Young Frankenstein.
But there's one, and this would be maybe one little sidebar. There's an interesting dynamic as well. We talked about sort of the clinical benefits that we are obviously, I think, all violently espousing. There's a big marketing element that we haven't really discussed, right? I mean, I think, did you see that paper in the Journal of Orthopedics? This is maybe the ACA survey from 2020. I think, some 30 or 40% of doctors admitted the reason they had adopted a robotic system was it because the marketing cachet. What do you think about that element of it?
I think the marketing cachet is going to go away, just like the marketing cachet went away in anterior hips and some other things, because everyone's going to have a robot.
Sure.
And there are also many types of patients. Some are more. In New York, the joke is when the first patient you see of the day, you're their 8th consult for their hip replacement. You're the 8th opinion already. It's like, in the South Bronx, I'm the only opinion, So, they're shopping around. And in the beginning, the marketing was very big. But that window closed very rapidly as everyone started doing some type of robotics. And now you have Think Surgical, and I don't work for them. I'm not a consultant for Think, all right? But sort of a implant agnostic, navigation robotic-y type of product is helpful. But I think helping the surgeon user experience is not thought of enough by manufacturers and people who interface with surgeons. The user experience, Synthes was very good at that. Their trays were organized in a certain way. The original Synthes, So anyway, so that was it.
So as we gain more adoption, and like you said, eventually everyone will have that full maybe suite of technology. It's already seeming to be happening with the largest orthopedic device companies, where they're evolving maybe from a device company into a full service provider across all of these different adjacencies for orthopedics. So how do you see that playing out, as we go into the future? What are some considerations companies need to take in hand as they go from a device company to a data company?
You want to go first? Or you want to
Yeah, I don't mind going first. I think first of all, companies need to be aware that their idea that they talk about in the back rooms of the corporate suite, if they're not including designer surgeons or rank and file surgeons in the room, it's like the Broadway show Hamilton, you need to be in the room, where the sausage is made and the decisions are made. I think over the years, too many decisions have been made without enough we'll call them users, we call them surgeons, experience when you and I talked about this earlier, in the design room, to help you make that decision, because you can't go to market with a piece of metal or with service or with data if that data is crappy, if that data is no one's going to use it. You know, I always love when someone comes to my office, the worst thing I want to hear is, all you have to do is, no, I should look at this and intuitively know how to use it. Right. Not all I have to do is, you know, so you want to...
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak. One of the reasons I left, you actually articulated the exact reason. One of the passion reasons why I left clinical practice is because I do think there are not enough end users in the room running the P&L that are making the decisions on products, right? And so I agree there's a lot of talk about, and I run an orthopedic company now that is in the business of making implant, so I mean, I speak, I'm trying to practice what I preach, I promise you that. There's a lot of talk about becoming a service provider, but I don't think just putting a robot in a room makes one a service provider. What makes one a service provider is what Ira described earlier. You need to send the engineers and the product managers to go see Dr. Kirschenbaum's clinic and spend 3 days and say, well, let me see how the waiting room looks. Let me see how it looks like when the patients go in the room. Let me see how it looks like when they book the surgery. Let me see what it looks like when they optimize the patient's physiology for pre-op clearance. And then that's obviously in the academic medical center world. Right. In the ASC world, same thing. Let me go sit in the clinic with Dr. Kasuma or whoever and see how the clinic works. And then you develop a solution. I don't see a lot of that behavior going, and I think I've earned the T-shirt now, being in the business long enough. I have clamored for, let's send our engineers, these great people in this room into those environments so they really understand. If you're going to be a solution provider, well, you've got to understand the practice of medicine, not just the 90 minutes of the surgery, right? The robot helps me execute the bone cuts, but there's a lot more to getting, as Ira described, and it's pretty expensive. It's stressful. Right? I mean, 30 years ago, when my mentors, they did 4 joints a week, right?
And
we're
drove,
doing 4 joints by the time
Mercedes. Yeah.
By the time Bob Barker's done, we're doing 4 joints nowadays, right? And so, I mean, we laugh about it, but it's very stressful to have that many people. So if you're going to really become a service provider, you need to develop a solution that sort of optimizes the clinic, optimizes getting the X-rays uploaded right. I don't see. I mean, I see a lot of talk about it. But I'd like to see somebody, and I can tell you at least at my company, and now that I have the sort of the privilege of having an amazing team and being in that chair, we have aspirations of being, developing, and you may ask, what does that look like? But those are my feelings on that. I think in cardiology, right? Remember Medtronic? You remember they sort of vertically integrated it and sort of bought some hospital and had fully vertically integrated the entire cath lab suite, right? I mean, I think that's what that looks like to some extent.
So I always think of service being attached to the word pain, okay? As a company, you should ask all of yourselves in the audience, if I'm supplying a service, am I hitting the pain points of my customer? The pain points of my customer. You cannot be a service provider if you're not solving their pain points. You think someone came in to me, we have this new drill and it's gonna, drill the bone better. That's not my pain point. Right. My pain point is getting drills through central sterile faster. That's my pain point. So any device you come up with that a surgeon's going to make a decision on, or a surgeon's going to have influence in the decision of, I think of pain points. If you're not solving their pain points, you're not a service provider. You're providing a service that you wanted to provide because a vice president said, hey, that's a good idea. They don't always talk that way. But I really feel you need, and as an analogy, the most exciting thing that I saw in the last year was, because I'm really good friends with Anand Murthy, who in the DC area is a well-known shoulder surgeon, and Andrew Jalla. They worked with a company called Ignite Orthopedics, which was a group of engineers that, without a big company, they developed with the 6 designer surgeons in the room with the engineers, a whole platform for shoulder. And I'm not saying it's a better platform. I'm not saying I'm not a shoulder surgeon, but I know a lot of shoulder surgeons. But the reality is that when that comes out, that answered so many pain points.
Right. Because it was surgeon-driven.
Because it's so
Fully surgeon-driven.
Fully surgeon, and then they ended up selling it to DePuy. Now, if DePuy did it in-house, they'd have a couple of design surgeons fly in for an hour, and it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah.
You know, and I was very impressed with that model.
I mean, the one other thing I'll say, and I'd be curious, I mean, the other reason I think providing services in this sort of, at least we'll call it an orthopedics episode of care, it's hard to make a margin being a service. I mean, let's call it like it is, right? The biggest margins in this industry by far are still in selling the metal and plastic, right? And so that's where all the intellectual energy goes. It's hard to unlock a margin in being a service provider because again, even we as doctors don't get paid very much for seeing the patients, right? So I mean, how is there anything left for a device company? So I think that's another thing that's driving that's driving the lack of service provision. I don't mean to be so negative on the device companies. It's just it's hard to make money. So I wonder as things evolve, and invariably, as Ira said, they're going to be technology enablement will become. You'll be a caveman in 5 years if you're not using some kind of navigation system to put a knee. Call it 7 years, whatever. Number one, number two. There's going to be a big migration, whether we like it or not, of to outpatient sites of care. Maybe in those two trends, there is an opportunity, and there's enough margin left in the Part A and Part B, for a service provider for device manufacturers to make a revenue stream, right? To have a business unit that can be profitable. Those are some of the things that existential questions I think about in the service provision.
So let me ask you gentlemen to look maybe a little further out. Ira, some young surgeons you're working with now in 10 years, as you consider them doing surgery, what technology or advancement in implants do you hope that they have in their hands in 10 years?
It's great. It's a great question. And I have no answer. No, just kidding. It's a great question, and I'm going to spin a little bit and say, first of all, the world of biologics, we haven't touched on it, is going to be explosive, absolutely explosive. Russ Warren, the great surgeon from HSS, used to say, stop worrying so much about the revision if you do a good primary. It's a great lesson to young surgeons, and biologics right now, whether they are the many patches for rotator cuff repair, some of the companies are looking at using them in hip repairs, in revision knees, in Achilles tendon. That's just the beginning of biologics. So I think keeping in touch with biologics, I think if you do in 10 years from now, I would predict that if you're doing a rotator cuff and you're not using biological augmentation, that's probably going to be out of standard. And they're expensive, and they're going to have to figure out the price on biologics, but the biologic world, the injection world, the PRP world, the stem cell world, that's going to get more refined. We're in early stages right now. So that is something I encourage all young surgeons to keep their eye on first. And the second thing I really give them advice on is to get your processes in place in your practice, because you may think it's all about that supramodular coned revision system, but in reality, if you can't answer, if the patient has a question and can't contact somebody, so process management is something that I teach a lot about with young surgeons. The upstream, midstream, and downstream. Doing that. Those are the two pieces of advice I think. With all this innovation, all this new metal, and all this new stuff, don't leave process management behind, because otherwise you won't be able to get through your day. You won't be able to get to your kid's soccer game, and you certainly won't be able to see more patients in a day.
Sure.
That's my feeling.
Sure. What innovation or advancement are you hoping?
Yeah, I mean, I always take a little bit more of a boring, pragmatic, and I'll kind of invoke the previous answer I gave. I mean, I still think there's a huge opportunity to again, Russ Warren. I'm a believer in that quote. to make. We have a lot of surgeons in America. Is a huge country geographically. We have probably 10,000, 12,000 surgeons who do some kind of joint replacement. Now you add trauma, right? Trauma's complex. I mean, orthopedics is a very technically challenging specialty in general, right? Getting the bones lined up, whatever you're doing. And I'm not joking. I'm really, biomechanically, the tolerances are pretty low, pretty high, I should say, in terms of, So I think in the future, I think there will be a better opportunity for shuttling patients to the site of care where they can get the expert in the tibial plateau fracture to fix their tibial plateau fracture. Because if you don't fix it correctly, well, just like a bad joint replacement, it falls apart. So I think that's the first thing is trying to, and this is maybe separate from what the industry can do, this is sort of triaging patients. Getting patients quickly and efficiently to the right expert is, I think, step number one, the person who can do the best job. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the previous answer, I think there's going to be a huge opportunity to raise just the standard of care for everyone where, the average surgeon who, is a generalist, in Wyoming in a small town who does 30 knees a year can do every knee as well as Dr. Kirschenbaum can do it. I still think there's a huge opportunity there to make it the user experience, number two. And then number three, again, I think this whole sort of episode of care, making patients come into the office for follow-up visits or for PROMs is just completely it's asinine. It's completely archaic. You could have them either have an embedded sensor in the implant, or whether it's just a watch or wearable, which are ubiquitous. You've got one on now. They're ubiquitous, right? We can use those things that are already in place, that they already have, to help them recover. I tend to think that's some of the boring, pragmatic stuff that I see in the future. On the biologic side, I guess, I love to read evolutionary biology, right? And human cartilage has taken 30 million years to evolve. I'm a little bit of a skeptic that we're going to solve bone-on-bone arthritis with some gel. It's very exciting.
I totally agree with you.
And I hope for that.
Yeah.
Trust me, I hope for that. But 30 million years of evolution, if we think we're such a talented species that we can figure that out in 50 or 100 years, I'm a little bit skeptical about, I think there's a little bit of overhype. Now, I agree with you on some of the repair augmentation. Yeah, I agree with you on that. So those are some of the, some of the things I see in the future.
And just with our last few minutes, I want to touch on something that I think both of you agree on and are very passionate about. What are some of the ways that we can get all of the industry stakeholders, that's surgeons, manufacturers, device companies, in that room together, like you were talking about, to cross-pollinate and create better care for patients? We've about a minute each.
Okay.
Go ahead. You go first.
I'll go first. Alignment is not a dirty word. Okay, it's used a lot, but I always say to my surgeons, you need to be passionate to the cause of the mission. And passion will not happen on simple phone calls and periodic Zooms and little things. You got to bring the surgeons in, and they have to be aligned with your company as well. How many of you can say that your surgeon KOLs, your key opinion leaders that work for you, are aligned, even know the mission statement of your company? Even know, how do they not know that? So I think it's so important to bring the surgeons in and indoctrinate them into your culture and your mission and alignment. And on the opposite sense, visit them, see them, and try to align with their missions, because alignment is 100% to me the key to every decision making that's going to flow from that. And that's my 1 minute speech.
Yeah, and again, I kind of gave my answer earlier. I would love to see every orthopedic manufacturer in here hire a practicing surgeon in a senior role in your company, give them a chance, give them the keys to some part of the P&L, give them some operational decisions, and let them be significant. Not the 1 hour fly in for a sort of a dog and pony show design meeting. Actually embed them inside and listen to them, hear them. This is what it's like to practice. This is the solution I need. To me, it's very simple. And again, that obviously is a two-way street. We've got to produce from our residency programs surgeons that are willing to take alternate career paths. But, for me, the answer is very simple. Hire those people into your companies, spend the money and bring them in. And I believe the products will be better because it will be driven by clinicians, who know what the practice of medicine is like. On the health system side, Ira and I talk about this a lot. We just need more of our kind, if there's such a thing, our species, in the C-suite of the health system, making the same thing, right? Owning the P&L and driving the orthopedic service line. That just doesn't happen, unfortunately, often enough. And again, as my personal, just sort of, 2-minute soapbox, that was the reason I walked away from clinical practice, because I really got frustrated seeing that there aren't enough of, surgeons. And so that's my simple answer to that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, your insight, your expertise. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Mike, for a great session.
Thank you. And we'll see you out on the floor. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Thanks. Enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you.